wanted to expand on peace building relating to these pair systems in a sense. So we talked about the pair relationship between sort of the intangible, invisible, internal aspect of an existence and its external form or external expression, and how they should be connected to one another and become one. In a sense, the implication behind that is, of course, that God is also a oneness of an internal character and external form. Not that God has a visible expression, but that God is not only the source of the observable universe, but also the source of the spiritual mind, internal, purposeful intention that lies behind every material expression. So I want to talk then about three different pair relationships as being significant when we think about peace building. And the first one in that sense is about individual peace. So it's expressing it each in this same sort of format or this same pattern. So it's saying that critical to making a better world, a peaceful world, is having individuals who are at peace. And what's the having individuals who are at peace? In a sense, it would be having individuals who resemble the Creator, or if you want to put it another way, because in most faith traditions, each faith has its particular founder. And when we think of that founder, be it Buddha, be it Guru Nanak, be it Muhammad, be it Jesus, whatever it may be, in one sense we think of that person as being an exemplary human being. Someone who did resemble God in the sense that they could manifest the way of life that is beautiful to God or pleasing to God. Or they could be an example of a true human being. So who is a true human being? A true human being is someone who, has those similar qualities to the Creator. But how does such a person come into being? Such a person comes into being not just because of, the Creator's idea of what a true human should be, but also by, during that individual person's lifetime, the interaction between their thoughts and their deeds. Or if you like, between their mind and their body. So how do you become a true individual? You need to develop yourself through your life and your life experience by living truthfully, honestly, lovingly, caringly. Then through this interaction between mind and body, you actually develop yourself into a true person, and then that becomes a resemblance of what God intended, when He created each person. So we're going to talk about that greater length in a few moments. So the second pair system, which we're stuck again. Oh dear, I don't know how Robin did it last time. Let me see if I can do it another way. Yeah, okay, I've done it another way. Is it there? No, it hasn't changed on there. It hasn't changed on here. Oh, that's very simple. So I want to move a slide. How about I can't? It's stuck again, Robin.
It's frozen. I closed it and opened it. It wasn't.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to close it now.
That's what I did last time. Would you like to talk? I think.
Okay, you do it. So I want to talk about the next pair relationship, which of course, what was the other one we talked about? We talked about mind and body. What was the other one we talked about? Pair system. Male and female, masculine and feminine. So I want to talk about that as well as being another key pair relationship for peace building. And Robin's about to get it going again. Essentially, what's that relationship? We're going to quickly work our way through. Instant recap here. Anything else? Okay. Anyhow, it's difficult to do it without the visual because it's difficult for you to remember what I'm talking about. But, so, male and female in the context of human relationships, we're basically talking about husband and wife. So if you can imagine, instead of, we had mind and body right before, now we've got male and female, or we might say husband and wife. So the quality of that relationship between husband and wife and their interaction will be very crucial to the result of their union. So of course, when husband and wife unite and become one, they become a sort of amalgam of husband and wife. But out of that relationship also what's emerging is children. So the quality of the relationship between husband and wife is very critical to the children that emerge from that relationship. And again, what was God's intention? Okay, now we're going to go through each one hopefully. Okay, here we go. Keep going on it. Your battery's running out, is it? Okay, stop. Great. Go back. No, one more. Forward. Back. Forward. One more. That's one.
That's it.
Okay, let's hope it's going to keep working. Do you need it plugged in?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so this is what I was trying to do. So next pair system, which is critical to establish with world peace. So we can't have world peace if we don't have better individuals, but also we can't have better world peace if we don't have a peaceful world, a peaceful nation, a peaceful society, and at the core and root of it all, as the building block for the peaceful world, a peaceful family. So again, we're talking about how important it is to make this relationship correctly between husband and wife in order to create the right foundation for children to be born and to grow and so on. And then thirdly, thanks Robin, don't go away in case something happens again. Here we go, that's good. And then the other pair relationship I want to talk about is us as human beings, as it were, and the natural world. And again, how can we make that relationship between people and the natural world to be in accordance with the intention of the Creator? So obviously people can live for the sake of the natural world lives for the sake of people. We get a harmony between people and nature which substantially fulfills the intention of the Creator, and then we get a world where there's peace, as it were, environmentally, or where there's a proper stewardship or ownership, where people own things not just as things they can exploit, but as things that they are a gift from God that they're respecting and appreciating and taking care of. So these three relationships I want to talk about each in more detail. And together they would make some key elements in fulfilling those pair systems such that we could actually live in a peaceful world. So how to become an individual at peace, or a true individual, how to create a true family as a foundation for a society, nation and world, and how to create a proper ownership or harmony between human beings and the natural world. So take them one by one. I'm just going to deal with one now. I'm going to deal with individual peace before we break for lunch. So this is going to talk then about the unity between the mind and the body, unity between word and deed, or thought and deed, or principles that you adhere to, actually being able to practice them in your life or live according to them, and through that becoming a true individual. So here's a few scriptural quotations, first of all, about our longing for God and building a bond with God as a basis to fulfill our lives, and about realizing our true nature and about acquiring virtues through practicing them. Of course, there are hundreds more quotations we could quote from, but from Judaism and Christianity, from the Psalms, as the deer longs for the flowing stream, my soul longs for God. From the Quran, the greatest bliss is the good pleasure of God. That is supreme felicity, supreme happiness. From Buddhism, every being has the Buddha nature. This is the self. The Tathagata shows all beings the storehouse of enlightenment, their own Buddha nature. Or from Aristotle, from the Greek philosopher, the virtues are acquired by first having actually practiced them. We become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, a balance, a proper balance, brave by doing brave acts. So, just a few words of wisdom from a variety of scriptures to give us that sort of sense how we're searching for God and we're seeking to be pleasing to God, and if we can fulfill that, we can become a person who manifests high character, beautiful nature, godliness, inner peace, and how in our life we need to practice virtues which we might see in God or see in Scripture in order to embody them ourselves. So these are the sort of themes that we'll be addressing. So what does it mean, mind and body unity? It means creating the right relationship between mind and body. Obviously, in one sense, because we recognize that human value resides, in a sense it resides here more than here. What do I mean? I mean, I'm not beautiful anymore, that's for sure. Maybe one time I was handsome. My wife looks at our marital photographs, the day of our wedding. By the way, thank you all for foregoing the royal wedding today.
Oh my God!
And the FA Cup final.
Oh my God!
At this very moment, the vow is being made, and 5:15, Chelsea and Manchester United will begin. Last night, when I went to bed a bit early because I had to get up very early, and I was dreaming last night. And in my dream, I was holding this seminar. And sitting in the audience were Harry, Meghan and William. Sitting in the audience, they were sitting in the audience. Anyway, you've foregone those things today. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about a mind that controls the body, or thoughts that become deeds. But the first thing, in a sense, is to connect the mind to higher purpose, to higher values, to higher virtues, or if you like, to the nature of the Creator. So what's the function of religion? Ideally, its function is to elevate our thinking and elevating our moral sense and our sense of values, so that we have a very, very high standard. And then the next critical issue is, how can you get your mind to actually get your body to do it, to practice it? And how does that happen? That doesn't happen once. Your mind and body come into unison once and the job is done. No, it's actually a developmental process. So in other words, when we're educating our children, you were talking about your wife's work with Montessori schools, when we're educating our children, it's not just, of course it's to learn fine motor skills and to learn all sorts of experiential things, but ultimately probably the most important thing is to learn virtuous ideas and virtuous practice. It's to teach to share, to teach to be kind to others, to teach to uphold values of honesty and good conduct and those sorts of things towards others. So religion should be elevating the mind, or philosophy should be elevating the mind, and then we should be creating a community, a society that's a result of those teachings, where it is encouraged and supported not only to believe in those virtuous and idealistic things, but actually day upon day upon day upon day to practice them in such a way that through the interaction between our mind and our body, we generate an energy which helps us to grow into a true person. Then that true person becomes the embodiment of those virtues, or of that nature of the Creator, and that person becomes a resemblance of God. So you could talk about mind and body unity, and you could talk about becoming a person of integrity. In other words, the virtues you believe in, the high moral principles, the high religious teachings you believe in, you've actually made a big effort to seek to practice those and not do things that are in contravention of those, such that actually you substantiate yourself into a person who is kind, or is generous, or is patient, or is honest, because actually you've habitually behaved in that way until, like Aristotle, by being just, by acting in just way, you become just. By acting in a temperate way, you become temperate. This is critically important. So we grow our character and we come to our maturity by receiving the right sort of influences and guidances, and inspirations and role models. I was talking to someone, I was talking to Alvia about Prince Harry, and she was talking about her concerns about mental health issues and a survey in the Sikh community about the impact of mental health issues in the Sikh community, and that Prince Harry had written a letter to the body that produced that report congratulating them that they were making people within that community more aware of mental health issues within the community, which are largely denied or not recognised, but actually very, very important. Because of course, as you know well, over the last few years, he's been expressing how he now understood how he was impacted by the death of his mother, and how he just cut off from it to avoid the pain and never dealt with it, and how he went through all sorts of inner turmoil because of that very painful loss, when he was 10, 11, 12, whatever it was, years old. So that in that sense, that person becomes then a role model, potentially, having openly spoken about those things and manifested that he's got to grips with and overcoming them, and then he's in an influential position to offer his congratulations to a Sikh report, and that gives people a sense of encouragement and that they're doing something good. So we want good influences that are coming to our mind, our thoughts, and creating righteous thoughts, and virtuous thoughts, and then virtuous thoughts turn into virtuous deeds, creates change, then helps our mind to grow and our body to grow and create this person. So mind and body unity, creating a person integrity, growing our character to maturity, creating a person who resembles or embodies the ideals of God, the nature of God, the virtues of God in their own individual being. That's critical to creating a more peaceful world. So however much we may have, very idealistic international bodies or treaties or statements about human rights or whatever, if we don't actually get people of integrity, the world will not be made better by that. Or if you like to think about it, the quality of virtue in leadership will be very important. So, we have leaders in society, but if those leaders are pretending to be something that in reality they're not, and behind the scenes they're doing something very corrupt, or they're behaving, or, was it Gandhi's words that Robin quoted earlier on? If you're manifesting righteousness in some aspect of your life, but not in another, then actually it's not truly righteous, because a life is a whole, not just separate parts. So, how important it is that we raise our children to understand and appreciate and be inspired by role models and teachings and so on that are virtuous, to become virtuous people, because then in the future we have the possibility for virtuous leadership. Because when you're in a powerful leadership role, you're in a very dangerous spot, aren't you? Particularly if you're not, if you're the most powerful, if you're difficult to critique. Because we see time and time again in institutions, even religious institutions, and in government, in all sorts of different things in life, once people become wealthy and powerful, they very often veer away from original virtuous intentions and end up creating something very corrupt. So actually, unless we get better people, unless we get people who embody a more Buddha-like, a more Christ-like, a more Muhammad-like, a more Guru Nanak-like, whatever you want to say, type of nature, however much we have aspirations as a society to make something better, it will be awfully difficult to do it. So this is the first, the first level, if you're the most fundamental level for peace building, is to do with mind and body unity. A give and take action between the virtuous mind and the body that performs virtuous actions. So mind and body unite and become one here, and that position is vertical to, or at one with, or in accordance with, God's, the creators, nature, and principles and laws, and ultimately love. And the person becomes an embodiment of that. So, there are some people who are admired beyond ethnicity and beyond religious difference. And these are not the only three, of course. There are many more, fortunately. But it's a meaningful thing, isn't it? When people admire and respect you who are not from your religion, or not from your culture, or not from your race, because it means you've transcended, those sorts of limitations. So ultimately, if we have more such people, we will unquestionably live in a better world. And how much extraordinary influence do a few individuals have on human history? And usually, through their lives, these people do not have an easy time. You could put other people up there. Obviously, you could put religious founders up there. You could put, many other people who are admired and respected within your communities or within your cultures up there. But usually, they went through persecution. They went through, being completely misunderstood, completely devalued, completely mistreated, often killed, and their righteousness emerged subsequent to that many, many times in human history. So, to be such a person is actually not easy. Why is that? Why is that when what we need is virtuous people? It's because we don't live in a virtuous world. So people who are true are often mistreated by a world that's not true, or attacked by people who have very selfish, corrupt intentions, and to whom this righteous person is a great threat. And therefore those people were persecuted and mistreated on many, many occasions. So if we think about growing, well, we basically, of course, some of us, unfortunately, maybe don't grow as ideally as we would wish because of disease or dietary problems or all sorts of different conditions. But fundamentally, in terms of our physical development, if we get the food and the water we need, if we get the air and the sunlight or the warmth that we need, our body will basically automatically develop from infancy, or even embryo if you like, through a period of growth to maturity. So let's imagine by 18, 19, 20, whatever it is, we actually reach a physical maturity. But critically important is not only reaching a physical maturity or knowing what it takes to stay healthy or grow healthy. Of course, we're becoming more aware of the things, we're becoming more aware of what we eat, and that we eat the right things and we take the right exercise and so on and so on and so on, and all sorts of physical disciplines that help us to grow better. But ultimately, it's not only necessary to have a healthy body. What's critically important is to have a good mind, or a good spirit, if you like, or a good soul. And this will be even more decisive because actually it's the mind or the spirit that needs to lift itself up in order to direct the body to behave in a virtuous way, so that through the virtuous actions you get an energy coming back from your good conduct that helps your spirit to grow. So, inspired by good teachings and by great role models, what's the idea? If, and maybe some of this is a bit fairy tale, the Harry and the Meghan world, some of it's maybe a little bit fairy tale, but actually some of it's no doubt also, in terms of their better aspects, a good thing. But isn't it great to have lovely role models? And if you attribute to those role models, hopefully correctly, very virtuous behaviour, then if everybody's looking up at them, today on the football field for Manchester United and Chelsea, there'll be some great footballers. There'll be a load of kids out there, girls and boys these days, who'll be modelling themselves on whoever it is, in those two teams, Hazard or whatever it is, somebody playing on those two teams, they'll be modelling themselves on it. But isn't it also important if, for example, let's hope they do it, please God, we pray for them, that Harry and Meghan can be an example of people who have a global outreach and are supporting all sorts of charitable causes to make a better world, and then other people growing up thinking, I want to be like that. That's a very important type of influence. So, just as you need food and water, air and sunlight for physical growth and development, so also spiritual growth and development doesn't happen in and of itself or by itself. The first precondition, as it were, is the intention of the Creator, which gave you that spirit and with a certain purpose and intention in mind. Without that, nothing could ever happen. But then it's how you get the right elements from your environment. Maybe you could say from God, maybe you could say from the influence and example of the religious founder, maybe you could say from the Holy Scripture, maybe you could say from the saints or the holy men and women in your tradition who were good role models. So those we call life elements. There's something which comes and is granted to you by God or someone in the position like parents or spiritual leader or elder brother or role model. But in addition to that element, which you might liken to the air and the sunlight in a sense, each individual person needs to add another element. And this element cannot be given. This element you generate for yourself. And it's to do with that interaction that creates energy between my good thought and my good deed. When my good thought becomes a good deed, my good deed through my body gives an energy back to my spirit that grows and confirms my own goodness and means I grow in goodness by doing goodness. This is something which Reverend talked of as vitality elements. He said, if you do righteous deeds, you get good vitality elements that help you to embody virtue. But if you do evil, selfish, cruel, heartless, uncaring deeds, they give you a bad element back, which makes you into a person who becomes an embodiment of selfishness or cruelty or misconduct or wrong behavior. So there's both these elements. We need to, in the young people's lives, we need to create a virtuous, positive example and influence, but we also need to encourage them into circumstances where they can practice love, practice living for others, practice honesty, practice generosity, practice kindness, practice all these things. And if you can encourage them into those environments and they can develop that, then they will help to add to the influence of the good examples, or ultimately you might say the influence of God coming through many different sources to themselves as individuals. So, in other words, what this is expressing, and this addresses a quite significant point in many theologies. In many theologies, of course, we have a bit of a problem because although God is love and God is goodness, the reality is there's an awful lot of things in this world that are not love and not goodness. There's so many tragic, painful, hurtful, selfish, bad things that happen in the world. Well, what's that to do with? It's to do with the fact that actually, in addition to God's responsibility, also each human being has their own responsibility. So, for example, no matter how good my wife and myself might be as parents, and however much we may seek to give good example and good guidance to our children, ultimately what our children become will not only be according to us. If, of course, we were terrible parents, forever fighting, domestic violence, hitting each other, mistreating each other, swearing at each other, being unfaithful to one another, and doing all sorts of terrible things all the time, that would be a major burden for our kids, right? But even if we weren't doing that, even if we were doing good things, even if we were a virtuous example, it would be necessary that our own children, their own lives, they can't get that as an instant inheritance. They have to actually practice that in their own living too. So, if you like, there's the sort of life elements, the gift we get from God through our parents and our elders, our religious founders, our scriptures and so on. That is something that we all need, and we all need to connect to, we all need the influence of, otherwise it would be very difficult to grow. But we need to add to it our own effort to practice virtue and goodness in our own lives. And that's why also, of course, when higher religious and philosophical teachings are really fulfilling their purpose, they can uplift society. Because what happens is, someone becomes, as it were, they join the Islamic faith and they take Muhammad as their role model. They join the Sikh faith and they take Guru Nanak as their role model. They become a Christian and take Jesus as their role model. They take some sort of sadhu or saint or whatever as their role model. And then actually, in a way, although they might not have had such a high example in their own immediate family or background, or even their own culture or their own history, they adopt another influence, do you understand, in their lives, and they aspire to make themselves a child to that influence, or a disciple to that influence, or obedient to that influence, and then they transcend their own culture and family background, do you understand, and adopt a higher level. And when that really happens, then a well-practiced virtuous religious tradition or philosophical tradition can uplift society and take it to a completely different level and create a peace which previously did not exist, because there was a lot of selfish and contrary to the nature of the creative type of conduct going on. But critical is this element of, how to connect to this good influence, without which it would be very difficult to develop. So this is in a sense a gift from God or a gift from others, how to connect to it by actually making a huge effort to practice in our own lives. And inevitably, when society is uplifted, the people who pioneer, if you like, lifting society to another level, they will of course be misunderstood by the existing society. Because the existing society is at a corrupt level, and they're at a virtuous level, and they will be persecuted and mistreated. But if they can persevere, and sometimes that perseverance goes beyond persecution and even death, and they exert an influence subsequent to their death many times in human history, and people ultimately adopt them as the role model, them as the example, them as the source of wisdom and virtuous conduct. So this is critically important to understand. And through this understanding, we can also understand that many things are happening which are not what God wanted to happen. Why? Because, let's see if I can go back to that one. You can understand that if mind and body are interacting with one another, but not centering on higher purpose, or not under the influence of a highly moral and loving role model, but actually under the influence of something very corrupt and very selfish and very bad type of behavior, then actually the wrong interaction takes place here. You can even express it sometimes in the sense that the body ends up dominating the mind. What do we mean by the body ends up dominating the mind? Well, you'll see where corruption enters society, usually it's some sort of greed or lust or very materially orientated desire that becomes the source of the corruption. So somebody who has a lot of power and influence, and then actually instead of following the virtuous teaching, they use their position of power and influence to satisfy their self-centered sexual desires. So how many times in human history do you see people who are in privileged positions in terms of power and wealth, using that position to exploit other people? And they're having a sexual relationship with someone else, but this is not according to God's intention. This is not for the sake of the other person. This is not creating something beautiful. This is, this could be rape in war, for example. where someone's the victor, smashing their way through some community, with physical force and power, and then what often happens in those circumstances, you get huge sexual abuse going on. Again, someone was talking earlier on about Congo and the lady there who's campaigning against sexual violence in that society. So you see those sorts of things happening, hugely destructive things happening, and that of course is not going to make the person, or out of the person the world that God intended. Something very different emerges, because the body's desires for sex or for material wealth or whatever are dominating the mind and overpowering the virtuous mind, such that an interaction is taking place here and an energy is taking place here that doesn't create something in the image of God or according to God's creative intention, but something very different. How are we doing? So I'm going to stop there.